Well, good morning, everybody. It is Saturday, the 21st of October. I have recovered from yesterday's exertions up and down Whitehorse Hill and across to Wayland Smithy, and I hope you've enjoyed that little video. During the last week, I filmed some bits and pieces at work. I was hoping to have done the video possibly on Thursday about work, but it turned into a bit of a rainy, windy kind of day, so I didn't film the rest of what I wanted to film. But having looked through what I have filmed, I think if I can probably put together quite a decent little explanation of the video that you can see. So I will I'll talk to camera about some of the things that go on at work and then put in the little clips here and there of the video that I filmed. So the main thing I'm talking about today is our engineering department. We have three particular aspects of engineering with our buses. So as well as general site maintenance, which is carried out by the guys who work in the department, clearly the single most important part of their job. Toby, leave the curtain alone. Thank you. Sorry about that. The single biggest part of their job is the maintenance and repair of vehicles. And we have three departments within the engineering workshops. We have the body shop, the electrical and mechanical engineering maintenance section, and then running shift. And I'll talk about each of these in turn with as I say, some video to demonstrate the processes. So the body shop, pretty much as the name would suggest, they build and repair the out-of-body skin of the vehicles. So if there is accident damage, well, if there is relatively minor accident damage, if there is major accident damage, we tend to send the vehicles away for repair, particularly if the cause of the accident is an external cause, another vehicle driving at speed into one of our vehicles, for example. If it's relatively minor or it's an internal accident, we tend to do the repairs in-house in order to control the cost. Having said that, we do mitigate the losses, because that's one of the important principles of motor insurance, is that you can't just spend as much money as you'd like, even if you're not at fault. You have to mitigate the loss and keep the loss down to the minimum. And that actually can mean that it's cheaper to send the vehicle away than to repair it in-house, particularly if repairing it in-house would take people away from other work, which means that you'd then have to get that work finished, you'd then have to pay overtime rates and so on and so forth. It can be easier to do things externally on a contract and cheaper in the long run. But there's no benefit to us in paying an external company to do repairs if we're going to have to pay the bill ourselves. We might as well just absorb that within the cost of running the company anyway. The body shop will also convert vehicles that have either joined our fleet or are leaving our fleet. There is quite a wide variance in the configuration of a vehicle. So all of our buses, all of our double-decker buses are now single-door operation. We don't have rear doors on them. But there are some bus companies that do have rear doors, and so if we buy a bus in from outside, or we're selling a bus on to another company, we may have to take out or put in panels on the near side in the middle section and remove seats or put in seats, depending upon whether or not depending upon what the configuration is going to be. In general, most bus companies now operate with just the front doors. But in order to facilitate making the panels to replace doors, we have quite sizable machinery in our body shop, which is quite scary to see in operation. Big metal presses and cutters, as well as small laser cutters for more intricate pieces of work. And once all the work is completed, the vehicle is then painted in the appropriate colour, and if it's going to be kept within our fleet, vinyl decorations, decals are put on, which route brand, company brand, and at the end of this video I will show some bits and pieces of a new route that we are undertaking with Thames Travel, one of our sister companies out in Wallingford, which is the River Rapids service from Oxford via Wallingford to Henley. And it's got a very fine decal going on the side of the bus, and I'll put that video in towards the end. So the body shop basically looks after repairs or reconfigurations of buses. The next group of bays are the single largest department in the company, which is the maintenance bays. And there are several things to note about our maintenance. First of all, every vehicle has regular maintenance through the year. So for our city buses, that's effectively once a month. They are checked to make sure that there is a satisfactory minimum standard for the parts that are fitted and that they're within their tolerances. And for our coaches, that maintenance happens once a month. Because they drive along motorways, they're travelling much greater distances, and the vibrations can actually wear out parts quicker. As well as their regular maintenance, every vehicle, rather like a private car, has to have the equivalent of the MOT test, which is a roadworthy test once a year under the aegis of the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, which is a combination of the Driver Standards Agency and the Vehicle Operators Standards Agency, so those that are in the DSA have now become the DVSA. And there is a site, we have one bay right at the far end of the building where those tests are carried out. Now, one of the significant things to notice about our engineering bays is that even though the engineers will have to work underneath the chassis, because quite a lot of what's going on is actually underneath the bus, in a standard garage of yesteryear, you would actually have a big open pit, about 6 foot deep, to allow a man to go down the steps and to work underneath. So the vehicle would drive over the hole, and the engineer would work down in the pit under the vehicle. And that's perfectly okay, as long as there is a vehicle standing over the hole. But when the vehicle reverses off the bay, and the bay is just left there, what you actually have is a very deep, very long 6 foot hole in the ground. And that is incredibly dangerous. Somebody walking without paying attention could easily fall in and suffer catastrophic, if not fatal, injuries. And this has happened in other places. So when we moved to our new depot in 2004, the decision was made to have no open pits whatsoever. But clearly, engineers still need to work underneath the vehicles. So we have 4 hydraulic ramps. Actually, I think they're probably pneumatic ramps, but anyway, whichever. And they raise, so they go one on each wheel, and they raise the vehicle to the required height. And then in order to protect against one of the ramps failing for any reason, although none of them have so far because they're all maintained on a regular basis, but just to avoid the possibility of the vehicle falling and crushing somebody, we then put 2 axle stands at the front axle and 2 axle stands at the rear axle, which the vehicle then rests upon. So if one of the hydraulic rams was to fail, the stand would still hold the vehicle up long enough for the engineer to get out of the way. And this system works very well. We've not had, so far in 13 years of operation, we've not had any significant incident involving this system working. We're very happy with the overall impact. People understand that their safety is being protected and follow the safe method of working, ensuring that axle stands are used as well as the hydraulic hydraulic lifts. And the nice thing about these lifts is that they actually all work in unison. So once you put them on, you then have one set of controls to raise all four simultaneously. And then we use wheeled steps to actually enable people to get into the vehicle, because the electronic gubbins, for example, are all inside the vehicle. And when a vehicle is being prepped for its annual road test, it also has a deep clean by one of the cleaning staff. And so they will be working inside the vehicle while it's at height, while somebody is working underneath and cleaning all the windows, wiping down all the seats and mopping the floors and all that kind of thing. So it's a very busy place, and in the engineering supervisor's office at the far end of these bays, there is a box file for every vehicle, and within that box file, all the documentation relating to that vehicle. Every day it's tested. The engineer completes a form saying what has been tested, what faults have been found, what has been replaced to remedy the fault, and then it all gets signed off at the end. Plus any defects that the driver may have, a driver of that vehicle may have reported, with things not working quite the way they should, which only become apparent when the vehicle's out in service on the road. The driver has a little book that they fill in a form, they keep a copy, they give a copy to the garage control room, and a copy stays with the vehicle. And the copy in the vehicle gets signed off by the engineer, who remedies the fault and then gets filed in the box file. So we have a paper trail of absolutely everything that is done to every vehicle, because safety on the road is obviously paramount. Safety of our employees as drivers, but also safety of the travelling public and safety of the general public. These vehicles are on public roads, and people have the right to know that they are in the best possible condition that they could be before they're allowed out onto the main road. And then the final area of the main engineering block is the running shift. And the vehicles in the running shift generally are vehicles that have broken down for whatever reason, and so are having remedies applied. We don't generally have more than 2 or 3. We have a fleet of about 200 buses, and having 2 or 3 that will have a defect serious enough that it can't be driven until it's remedied is actually quite rare. And that can be almost anything, really. It can be a seat that's not properly installed. It can, because obviously you want your driver's seat in particular to be safe. It can be loose panels which have just vibrated loose or had accident damage that hasn't been noticed. It could be lights not working, or even CCTV not working. Because we have CCTV fitted, there are certain cameras on buses which act instead of internal mirrors. So on the double-decker buses, for example, we have cameras upstairs so that the driver can see on the monitor in his cab what's happening upstairs. In the past, there used to be a kind of periscope system of mirrors that you'd look at a mirror here that reflected up to a mirror through a gap at the front of the bus to a mirror at the front top deck, which then looked down the bus, and the driver could see what was happening upstairs, because there's also a mirror. The interior mirror of a bus is not for seeing out of the back, it's for seeing what's going on with passengers, just to make sure that everybody is safe. And so if the camera or the camera upstairs or the monitor in the cab isn't working, the bus can't go out on the road. So there are certain elements which are not critical to the road safety of the vehicle, but are critical to the safety of the people in the vehicle. And if those things are missing, the vehicle simply doesn't leave the site until it's fixed. And we have an emergency 24-hour on-call service for CCTV, for example. But equally, if the driver is out and about and it gets darker and he puts his lights on and then one of the bulbs fails, running shift have a van and they will go out to the vehicle and replace the bulb there and then, so that the vehicle can stay in service and stay legal. So the running shift is the equivalent to the AA for a private motorist. And then the very final bay is the Bozo DVSA bay, and you'll notice in that bay that still has an open pit. The DVSA, for whatever reason, don't like the hydraulic lifts and axle stands, so they insist that a bay, a hole in the ground, is created for them. We don't like this, and the only engineering bay accident we've had at this site happened in that bay when somebody walked on the metal covers that cover the hole, and one of them hadn't been fitted properly and it slipped. Fortunately, they weren't badly injured. This was about 10, 12 years ago, not long after we moved up. But we really would like to fill in this pit, and one day we will get our way, because eventually it will be seen to be too high a risk to have these open holes in the ground. The other thing in this bay is at the very top end there is a rolling road where brake tests can be carried out. So the rollers will turn the front wheels and then the rear wheels, and the foot brake and then the handbrake will be applied, and the measure of torque required to get those wheels moving, because a brake won't ever completely stop a vehicle from slipping, but there are safety limits. You have to have a minimum amount of torque required in order to get the vehicle moving against both the foot brake and the handbrake. And as long as the torque is required is above a particular limit, then the vehicle is road safe. And that's true of all vehicles on the road, whatever the type. So those are the main engineers' bays. And then outside we have the bus wash and fueling alley. Now, every vehicle that comes onto the site is refueled when it comes onto the site. So the driver, when they bring a vehicle back to the depot, whether it's one of the peak services, so it comes back at 10 o'clock in the morning or at 6 o'clock in the evening after the peak has finished, or whether it's one of the main service buses that might come in at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, the driver will drive it up to the fueling alley and then leave it there for one of the fuelers to then drive into the fueling alley and top up the fuel. We have digital monitoring of our fuel, so the vehicle registration is entered for every vehicle, and the amount of diesel that the vehicle uses is measured, and that way we're able to check on fuel efficiency, because a sudden spike in inefficient fuel usage can be indicative of an issue with a vehicle, the engine of a vehicle. But also it allows us to monitor how much fuel we're using, because public transport companies like bus companies have a fuel tax rebate from the government, because they're trying to make public transport more efficient so that people will leave private cars behind and use the public transport services. So we pay the same fuel tax as everybody else on our fuel, but then get a rebate from the government depending upon the amount of mileage in service that we have operated and the amount of fuel it takes to actually operate that service. They're quite complex formulas, but basically we need to know exactly how much fuel a vehicle is using in order to show that it's efficient and to show that it qualifies for the rebate. We have a big grid at the beginning of the fueling alley, and that's for our coaches. We have chemical toilets on all of our long distance coaches, and obviously these have to be emptied. So this grid is our sewer, basically, and from there the waste is stored separately, treated, and then taken off site. And after the vehicle's been fueled, while it's being fueled rather, it also has other liquids topped up, oil and coolant being the two obvious ones, but we also use something called AdBlue, which is mixed with the fuel as it goes into the engine, and the AdBlue helps the diesel engine to burn the fuel more efficiently and also to trap a lot of the nitrous oxide and other particles that diesel burning. If you ever seen an unregulated diesel engine, there's a lot of black smoke, almost soot-like smoke comes out, and there are lots of particles of burnt matter within the diesel smoke. And so we have particulate traps within the vehicle, so similar to mufflers, if you like, but actually capturing a lot of the particles that would be in the smoke otherwise. But we also have a chemical that we add into the diesel that helps the engine to burn it more efficiently and to trap a lot of the particles that wouldn't be trapped by the particulate traps. And there are various grades of engine within the European Union, all the way from Euro 1 to Euro 6 is the current standard. And I say the current standard, the idea is that I think by 2025, all vehicles on the road should have Euro 6 classification engines. All of our vehicles are either Euro 5 or Euro 6 already. For a company of our size, we are one of the greenest bus companies in the country. And it's a source of some pride for our finance director in particular, who is a very green-minded person. And so for example, we are participants in the Low Carbon Hub. The Low Carbon Hub is a charitable organisation within Oxfordshire where companies or institutions with large roof space give the roof space rent-free to the Low Carbon Hub. They install photovoltaic tiles and sell electricity back to the landowner at a reduced rate, and are able to then sell the excess electricity to generate income for the Low Carbon Hub to invest in more photovoltaic tiles and to improve the energy efficiency of private homes within the county. And we were the first private company to actually go into partnership with the Low Carbon Hub. As you can see, we have a very long building and a very big roof space, and it was just not being used, and so now it is covered in photovoltaic tiles, all installed and owned by the Low Carbon Hub, and we buy our electricity from them at a significantly reduced rate, which again helps us to reduce our carbon footprint and our impact on the environment, both locally and nationally and internationally. And at the end of the to come back to the fueling alley, at the end of the fueling alley we have a bus wash, and the bus wash, every vehicle, except when it's really cold and icy at night time, every vehicle when it comes back to the site goes through the bus wash. Some of the buses are actually washed by hand as well, particularly the coaches where, because of their size, sometimes they don't get thoroughly cleaned by the bus wash. And we recycle 60% of the water from each wash into the next wash. So we keep, I don't know how aware you are of bus washes, or car washes, they work on the same principle. There is actually very little water being used anyway. And we try to, again, keep control of our resources, and so we recycle and reuse as much of the water as we can, again, in the next wash. So overall, we have a very good relationship with our environment, and part of why some of us work for a bus company is because it is the low impact alternative to private excess, if you like, that we have these green concerns, these climatic and environmental concerns, and it's positive that we work in a company where these things are taken seriously. So we're out in the yard now, and you'll see that there are vehicles being prepared by the drivers to go out onto the road. Every vehicle that goes out, before it leaves the depot, it is a mandatory requirement of PSV regulations, that's public service vehicle regulations, that the driver check certain elements of the vehicle to ensure that it's road safe. So all of the lights, the interior and exterior lights, are checked. The tyres are checked to ensure that there aren't any cuts or marks in the wall of the tyre which might indicate that the tyre could fail at some point while the vehicle's out on the road, and that all the nuts are in place and don't appear to be loose. I mean, you don't have to physically check, it's just an eyeball check, and the emergency door opens, that the CCTV monitor is working and that the upstairs can be seen, or the back door can be seen when it's operated, that the bell push on the bus is working, that each of them is there, and that all of the handrails that customers will depend upon to keep them safe as they walk up and down the vehicle or are standing are actually securely in place. And all of these things, this actually makes up part of the driving test as well. So when a person comes to drive a bus, There is the theory test in the same way as there is for a car driver. There is the practical test, but there's also the hazard perception test. But then there are two other tests that are carried out. There's something called a case study, which is how you would resolve a particular set of circumstances if you were out on the road, and the vehicle identification test, where you walk around the vehicle and show the examiner what the various parts of the vehicle are, what they do, and the point of that is these parts of the vehicle that you're showing them are effectively the pre-checks, the pre-service checks that every driver must by law carry out before taking a vehicle from the depot. And so you'll see various vehicles and drivers walking around and checking things. And the tyres are an interesting thing. We don't actually own any of the tyres on our buses. They are all rented from the tyre company, and they have a permanent presence on site, and their job is to check the tyres of the vehicles that are in for their service to make sure that they meet the minimum legal standards, and also to deal with any ad hoc situations. If there is a tyre that is failing or has failed, we do occasionally have blowouts, the same as everybody else does. The problem you have is that no matter how many times you check components, one of them will always fail. Even if it's a brand new component, it can still fail without any notice. All you can do is to reduce the likelihood of that happening by having proper in-depth checks on a regular basis. And so the tyre operative is on site the whole time, and then tyres that are no longer roadworthy are taken away and reused, retreaded, refurbished in whatever way they can be, and ultimately disposed of in an environmentally competent way when they've reached the end of their life. So I've given you a nice bit of a tour around our engineering and safety aspects of operating a bus service. I will at some point go more into the details of actually how the services are put together, and how drivers and controllers know which buses need to be where and when and all the rest of that. But I hope this has given you some interesting insights into the physical operation of the vehicles in our fleet, and that you found it at least somewhat interesting. So until tomorrow, I will say goodbye. For those of you who follow the main podcast, I will be recording an episode later today. I've got a few bits and pieces to talk about, and so until either later today or until tomorrow, I look forward to speaking to you again, and so bye bye for now.
She's waiting for love to be realized. I'll send her